Anne Widdicombe is unbelievable. Anne Widdicombe actually is saying that Nigel Farage could become Prime Minister. In fact, she's not alone. The Telegraph have been saying it as well, and it's just sort of out there. But do you remember the absolute outrage when it was suggested that Jo Swinson could become Prime Minister? And lots of people said they wouldn't vote Lib Dems because of the absolute cheek of the Lib Dems saying that they could get the keys to number 10. Nigel Farage has never been elected as an MP. He's tried 7 times and failed. And for whatever reason, he's on all of our screens all of the time. And when he says, or when someone around there says that Nigel Farage could be Prime Minister, the reaction is totally different. Everybody sort of says, oh, yes, he could be. Or many others like me think, oh, my goodness, that would be an absolute nightmare, a disaster.
Anne Widdicombe. And what do you make of this standoff? Is it handbags at dawn?
Oh, I think it's probably swords at dawn. I think it's probably getting quite violent. I know both these men. I worked with Cameron for a while in Parliament. I know that Cameron is smug. And he is snobby, and he is dismissive of people who don't share his views. He is all of those things. I can absolutely say that of my own observation, not of anything I've read or heard. And by contrast, Nigel says, sometimes people don't like it, but he says exactly what he thinks. And I think people are now so fed up with the Parliament that they've got. They're so utterly fed up. They're yearning for somebody who just says it as it is, says what he thinks rather than what he thinks you want to hear him say, which is something very different. And so I think Nigel will win this one. I think he's already winning this one.
But speaking of winning, Anne, hasn't David Cameron achieved far more in his political career than Nigel Farage, given that he's been Prime Minister and an MP, neither of which has been achieved by Nigel?
Well, you've left out 2 important words there, so far.
Do you think Nigel Farage could become Prime Minister at some point?
Well, I would like to think so. But the crucial thing is to keep our eyes at the moment and our aims on this election. And in making sure that now that we have overtaken the Conservatives in at least one poll, making sure that we go on and that we build on that. Because the truth is, we're the Conservatives now. There are no Conservatives in Parliament. David Cameron certainly isn't a Conservative in any recognisable form.
Of course, I should stress that the Conservatives will argue they have a very conservative agenda. They're going to stop the boats, they're going to reduce immigration and cut taxes. But Anne, of course, you're chuckling away. You're entitled to do that. Listen,
no,
you dropped... Go on.
I'm entitled to ask. I don't want to hear what they're going to do. My question is, why haven't they already done it? You know, it's Sunak. Talk about stop the boats. What a joke. Sunak has spent 2 years with no plan B, putting all his hopes on Rwanda, which still hasn't happened. And he's got the gall to say to us, trust me, I'll stop the boats. I know he won't.
However, Anne, Nigel Farage can say that he's going to stop the boats, end wokery and cut taxes because he's not going to be Prime Minister. He's not going to win power. He will be lucky to win the seat in which he's campaigning. This is fantasy politics, isn't it?
Oh, no, it isn't. I mean, for a start, we're not going to go from naught to government overnight. We know that. We're not going to be the government in power after the general election. For heaven's sake, of course not. But what we can do is take over from the Tories as opposition, both as effective opposition and then later as actual opposition. We can do that. And, you know, when we say, as Reform says, it's not just Nigel, that we will stop the boats, and we put forward a plan to do it, and just eye in the sky. When we say we'll do that, I think people believe that, yes, if we get half a chance, we will. So I would say, give us the chance.
And what are the circumstances in which Nigel Farage might eventually become Prime Minister?
Well, if you want to build scenarios, and I'd much rather deal with today's reality than tomorrow's possibilities, but the scenario would be that the Conservatives are very badly wiped out this time, that they don't get their act together, and that would be in keeping with, the last few years, they just don't get their act together. Then I think people will look to say, well, where is the common sense party? And it's Reform.
And what would you say to those watching or listening who consider Nigel Farage to be a dangerous and divisive man who has done untold damage to this country?
Well, the electorate apparently doesn't agree.
Do
the figures actually add up? And with Reform's manifesto, or contract as they want to call it, look, here are the big figures, OK? They say they want to bring in £150 billion and want to get £141 billion out of the door. They're big numbers. I'll come back to that in a second. But the key thing is here, look, that bar is bigger than that bar, and that actually looks quite sensible because you've got more money coming in than you've got going out. There's a £9 billion buffer, so that looks good. But let's just dig into what these bars actually comprise, and you'll see there's actually a few holes in them. Here's the money coming in. Let's focus on the money going out. OK, we've broken it down into all the main policy areas here, and the biggest of them, £70 billion, is this bar. That's all the tax cuts, or a lot of the tax cuts. Raising the income tax personal allowance to £20,000. You've got cutting stamp duty to 0%, basically abolishing it for anyone buying a house below £750,000. You've got inheritance tax, basically abolishing inheritance tax below £2 million. That's a lot of stuff, very expensive. So raising the question, can you actually afford it? And that's where these bars come in, OK? So we'll focus on the biggest of them first of all. That's the biggest money raiser, slashing wasteful spending. And the way that Reform want to do this is basically saying every £5 and every £100 needs to be cut of the government budget. Now, that's current spending. This bar over here, that's the money they want to raise. But there's a few questions here, OK? First of all, what about the state pension? Reform hasn't said they want to cut the state pension, so you probably can't include that. What about welfare? That's £180 billion. Well, Reform has said they do want to cut welfare, but they've counted it somewhere else in their manifesto, so you can't really include that in this calculation. That brings all of this down to £680 billion. You see the issue, we're going down here. Although you could ask the same question about defence and international aid. Defence they want to raise the spending on, international aid they want to cut, but they've already counted it elsewhere. So really, strictly speaking, if you want to be accurate about this, you want to not count that, and that brings this total down to £610 billion. And so if we do the exercise all over again and work out £5 in every 100 of this, just look at this bar, it goes down to £30 billion. May not seem like much of a difference, but if we factor that back into the big picture here, look, that bar's lower, we tot it all up. Previously, that's what you had, £150 billion, that £9 billion buffer, it looked pretty positive, but now, look, that goes down to £130 billion, it's below that bar. You've got a black hole, it's like Liz Truss all over again, more money going out than coming in. And that's a big issue here, and it's only looking at one particular part of this. But another thing just worth mentioning here is the scale of what we're talking about. These were the manifestos from the Labour, the Conservative, the Lib Dems. The higher the bars are, the more kind of money going out, basically, as a result of those manifestos. Now look at Reform. Just look at that. Look at how high that bar is. The only other party, in terms of, ambition that comes anywhere close to that is, of all parties, the Green Party.
There are so many things wrong with the Reform Party. They really aren't worth the time of day. And the only reason we're discussing them is because the media are giving them so much attention. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Do comment below. If you haven't subscribed, do subscribe.